At my son's funeral, the chapel was so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the lights overhead. Polished wood pews, white lilies lining the aisle, a closed casket at the front darker than it should have been, like it was absorbing the grief in the room. I stood beside it with my hands folded, steady the way they'd learned to be over decades of work and responsibility. People kept telling me I looked composed, strong. They didn't know that strength, like grief, can be practiced. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. My name is Elias Crown. I am 69 years old, and until that morning I believed I had already lived through the worst day of my life. My son Adrian had been buried 3 days earlier in every sense that mattered. The papers said sudden illness. The doctors used careful language, the kind meant to soften the blow while changing nothing. He was 36, brilliant, relentless, the kind of man who built something real before most people figured out who they were. $70 million accumulated through companies he started, sold, and rebuilt again. Not inherited. Earned. Every dollar carried his fingerprints. And now, he was gone. The chapel doors creaked softly as late arrivals slipped inside. I didn't turn. I already knew who it was. She approached without slowing. Black dress. Perfect tailoring. A face arranged into something that resembled mourning if you didn't look too closely. She stood beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Expensive and entirely inappropriate for a funeral. "You look well," she murmured. I kept my eyes forward. "You should eat," she added. "People worry when they see a man your age skipping meals." There it was. Not sympathy, not loss. Assessment. Her lips curved as she leaned in closer, her voice low enough that no one else could hear. "It's tragic, of course," she said, "but life moves on. Adrian would have wanted that, especially with what he left behind. 70 million didn't need to be said out loud. It hovered between us like incense." I nodded once. She smiled wider. That smile told me everything. She thought this was over. She thought grief made people soft, confused. She thought age made them slow. She had already reorganized the future in her head, and in that future I was an inconvenience that would fade quietly. The service began. Words about legacy, about kindness, about a life cut short. I listened, but my mind wasn't on the eulogies. It was on patterns. I had spent my life reading them, in markets, in people, in contracts that looked generous until you read the margins. Adrian learned that skill from me. He used to joke that I could hear a lie breathing before it spoke. As the final hymn ended, people rose. Chairs shifted, quiet sobs echoed. She stayed beside me. "I'll handle everything," she said gently. "The estate, the lawyers, the companies. You won't have to worry about any of it." I finally turned and looked at her. Her eyes didn't flinch. "You should rest," she continued. "You've done enough." I smiled. Not because I was comforted, because I already knew something she didn't. Adrian had never left anything unfinished. Not a project, not a deal, not a safeguard, and he had trusted me with the parts he knew might one day matter most. As the mourners began filing out, she placed a hand lightly on my arm, a gesture meant for an audience. "We'll talk soon," she said. We would, just not in the way she imagined, because while everyone else believed this funeral marked the end of something, I understood it for what it really was, a beginning, and I was already several steps ahead. The days after the funeral moved slowly, like the world itself was unsure how to behave around me. Condolence cards arrived in careful handwriting. Old colleagues called, voices lowered as if grief were contagious. I thanked them all and said very little. Silence has always been useful to me. People fill it with assumptions. She didn't waste time. By the third morning, my son's widow arrived at my house with a leather folder tucked under her arm and a confidence that hadn't existed before the casket closed. She didn't ask to come in. She stepped past me as if the threshold belonged to her now. "I had the locks checked," she said casually. "Just to be safe." I closed the door behind her and watched her take in the room. Bookshelves, framed photos, the kind of home built by someone who values permanence over appearance. She placed the folder on the dining table and opened it with practiced precision. "Adrian was very organized," she said. "Meticulous, really. He trusted professionals. I've already spoken with the firm handling the estate. I poured myself coffee and didn't offer her any. Which firm? I asked. She named one. Expensive, aggressive, known for moving fast when there was money to secure. Efficient choice, I said. She smiled again, pleased. I thought you'd agree. I sat across from her and waited. She slid a document toward me. This is just preliminary, she said. An acknowledgement. Mostly procedural. I didn't touch it. I'm not signing anything today. Her smile tightened. Just a fraction. Of course, she said. There's no rush. But the companies need direction, the accounts need clarity. Investors don't like uncertainty. Neither do predators, I thought. She leaned back, crossing her legs. You don't have to involve yourself. Adrian wouldn't have wanted you burdened with details. You spoke to him about this? I asked. She hesitated for half a second too long. We discussed everything, she said. I nodded slowly. Adrian had been many things. Careless with truth wasn't one of them. That afternoon after she left, I went into my study and unlocked a drawer I hadn't opened since my son was alive. Inside was a slim drive labeled in his handwriting, "If anything happens." I sat there for a long time before plugging it in. What Adrian left wasn't dramatic. No videos, no confessions, just records, timelines, copies of emails, notes written in his precise, almost surgical style, and one message addressed to me. If you're reading this, then I was right to worry. He had been documenting things for over a year. Discrepancies, arguments disguised as affection, pressure applied quietly, consistently, discussions about planning ahead that always seemed to circle back to control. There was also something else. Transfers, not large, not obvious, but deliberate. Money moving into trusts she didn't know about. Structures built to hold, not to hide. I felt something loosen in my chest. That evening she called. I was thinking, she said, voice warm, rehearsed. We should move you closer, somewhere easier, less upkeep. I like where I am, I said. Well, she replied lightly, that can change. There it was again. Assumption. Over the next few days, she became generous, inviting, almost kind. She brought food I didn't eat, suggested trips I declined, asked questions that pretended to be concern. Each one was a probe. I answered carefully, truthfully, but never fully. On the 5th day, she lost patience. You don't need to fight this, she said sharply. Everything is already decided. I looked at her across the table. No, I said. Everything is documented. Her eyes flickered. What do you mean? I smiled just enough. Exactly what I said. She stood, gathering her things too quickly. We'll let the lawyers handle it. That's usually best, I agreed. After she left, I stood alone in the quiet house and thought about my son, about how well he'd known the woman he married, about how carefully he'd prepared for the possibility that love might turn transactional. She believed time was on her side. She believed grief had slowed me. What she didn't understand was that I had raised a man who planned for storms long before the clouds appeared. And storms, once they break, rarely hit only one shore. The lawyer she chose called me 2 days later. Smooth voice, measured pauses, the kind of man who spoke as if he were already billing for the conversation. He suggested a meeting downtown in a glass tower overlooking the river that cuts through the city like a clean incision. I agreed without hesitation. People reveal more when they think they're on home ground. The conference room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and confidence. He shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. We understand this is a difficult time, he began. Our goal is to make this transition as simple as possible for everyone involved. Everyone, I repeated. He nodded. Your daughter-in-law has full authority as surviving spouse. That gives her considerable latitude. Authority, I said calmly, is only useful when it's uncontested. He paused, then smiled. Of course. That's why we're here. He slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. I'm curious, I said. Did she mention the trusts? His smile faltered. Not much, but enough. What trusts? He asked. I leaned back. Exactly. The meeting ended politely. Too politely. He promised follow-up. I promised nothing. That evening I received my first official notice. A request for medical documentation. Subtle. Framed as concern. The implication was clear. She was preparing to question my capacity. I slept well that night. The next morning I drove north away from the city to a small coastal town where the roads narrow and reputations matter more than signage. I met with a woman I'd known for years. Sharp mind, sharper ethics. She had helped me structure assets long before Adrian ever considered marriage. She read through the documents in silence. "They're moving too fast," she said finally. "That tells me they're afraid of something." "They should be," I replied. She tapped the page. "Your son insulated most of this, but not all. There's a pressure point." "Where?" "The companies," she said. "Control versus ownership. She wants control more than the money. Control lets her rewrite the story." I nodded. That afternoon I did something I'd been avoiding. I went to Adrian's office. The space had already been partially cleared. His assistant looked startled to see me. "I wasn't told you were coming," she said. "That's all right," I replied. His desk was immaculate. Too immaculate. Adrian never worked that way, but the drawer was still locked. I knew the code. Inside were notebooks, old-fashioned, handwritten. He always said writing slowed thought down just enough to expose lies. One entry caught my eye. "If she ever tries to rush things, it means she's hiding a timeline." Timeline. That word followed me home. That night, the call came. She didn't bother with warmth this time. "You're being difficult," she said. "I'm being careful. You're stalling." "No," I said. "I'm waiting." "For what?" "For you to make a mistake." Silence. Then a laugh. Sharp, dismissive. "You think you're smarter than this," she said. "But you're alone, and you're tired." I let the words hang. "You should come stay with me," she added. "At least temporarily. It would look better." Look better to whom? To everyone. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about appearances, control of narrative, who spoke first, who looked credible when questions started being asked. "I won't be moving," I said. Her voice hardened. "Then don't be surprised when others decide for you." The line went dead. The following day, the second notice arrived. This one less polite, more formal. Requests, deadlines. I forwarded everything to my attorney and poured myself a drink I didn't finish. By evening, I received a message from an old colleague of Adrian's. Brief, careful. "Something feels off. If you're available, we should talk." We met in a quiet place. He told me things Adrian had never written down. Concerns, arguments, plans delayed because he didn't trust the timing. Timing again. When I returned home, I opened the drive once more and found a file I'd missed. A single sentence, time-stamped. "If she pushes for authority before the audit clears, she's exposed." I smiled for the first time in days, because audits have a way of slowing down people who rely on speed, and patience, I'd learned, is a form of leverage. She thought she was closing in. What she didn't realize was that every step she took was narrowing the space around her, and soon there would be nowhere left to move. The audit request landed like a stone dropped into still water. Not dramatic, not loud, just heavy enough to change the surface. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn her. I simply let the process begin the way Adrian had intended it to. Quietly, methodically, and without emotion. The firms involved were reputable, cautious, and allergic to surprises. They asked for records. They asked for timelines. They asked for explanations that couldn't be waved away with charm. She felt it almost immediately. Her calls became shorter, sharper, less rehearsed. "This is unnecessary," she said during one conversation, no attempt at warmth this time. "You're delaying distributions. People are asking questions." "That's what audits are for," I replied. "You're undermining confidence." "No," I said, "I'm establishing it." There was a pause on the line. Then very carefully she said, "You're not well." It was the first time she said it outright. Concern stripped of costume. Within a week, a letter arrived suggesting a comprehensive evaluation. Framed politely. Signed by a physician I had never met. The implication was clear enough to be insulting. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer marked correspondence. Adrian had labeled it that way years ago with a small note beneath. Useful later. I scheduled my own evaluation the next morning. Independent, thorough, boring in the best possible way. The report was clean. Sharp cognition, full capacity, no concerns. I sent a copy to her attorney without comment. Her response came that night. "You didn't have to do that," she snapped. "I wanted to," I said. "You're making this adversarial." "You made it adversarial when you started counting." Silence. Then something changed. She stopped calling. Instead, things started happening around me. A neighbor mentioned someone asking questions about my routines. A former colleague said a woman had called, fishing for stories. A distant relative I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted lunch. Pressure rarely announces itself. It just applies. I stayed still. Meanwhile, the audit uncovered what Adrian had hinted at but never confirmed. Early withdrawals, deferred disclosures, decisions made in haste and justified later with paperwork that didn't quite line up. Nothing criminal. Not yet. But enough to make advisors nervous. Enough to slow everything. I received a message from the lawyer who had been so confident weeks earlier. "We should revisit the structure," he said. I declined. That afternoon, I went back through Adrian's notebooks, slower this time. Not searching, listening. He had written about trust the way some people write about weather. Something you observe, not assume. One passage stood out. If someone believes control is already theirs, they stop hiding the mechanisms. That night, she came to my house unannounced. No folder this time, no polished smile, just impatience dressed in black. "We need to resolve this," she said, standing in my doorway. "We are," I replied. "You're freezing assets." "I'm preserving them." "For who?" she demanded. "For the truth." Her jaw tightened. "You think you're protecting Adrian. You're not. You're tarnishing him." I stepped aside and let her in. She paced the room, restless now. "People are talking. The board is uneasy. This isn't what he would have wanted." I looked at her. "You're right. It isn't." She stopped pacing. "Then stop." "No." Her composure cracked. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" she said. "You're trying to trap me." I smiled gently. "No, I'm letting you move freely." She laughed, brittle. "You're old. You're tired. This ends when you do." That was the moment. Not because of the cruelty, I expected that. Because of the certainty. People only speak that way when they believe time is an ally. After she left, I made a call to a man Adrian trusted with uncomfortable questions. He listened, asked very few of his own, and said something that stayed with me. People who rush inheritance usually rush mistakes. The next morning, the audit expanded. Additional reviews, cross-checks, delays. By evening, I received a message from her lawyer asking for a meeting. Neutral ground, calm discussion. I agreed. Not because I wanted peace, but because pressure reveals shape. And she was starting to show hers. Some battles are loud, others are won by standing still long enough for the other side to lose balance. And she was swaying now, whether she knew it or not. The meeting took place in a quiet office overlooking the water, the kind of place chosen to signal reason and restraint. She arrived late. Not fashionably late, intentionally late. A small assertion of control. Her lawyer sat first, hands folded, expression carefully neutral. She followed a moment later, sunglasses still on indoors, as if light itself had become an inconvenience. "Thank you for coming," the lawyer said. "I didn't come for thanks," I replied. "I came for clarity." She removed the glasses and met my eyes. There was irritation there now. Fatigue. The confidence had thinned. "We need to settle this," she said. "The delays are damaging." "To whom?" I asked. She glanced at her lawyer, then back at me. "To the companies, to Adrian's reputation." "His reputation isn't fragile," I said. "It was built on discipline." Her lawyer cleared his throat. "We're proposing a temporary arrangement. Shared oversight. A timeline. Something predictable." "Predictable for whom?" I asked again. No one answered. I slid a folder across the table. Not thick, just heavy enough to matter. Inside were summaries. Not accusations, patterns, transfers clustered around specific dates, communications timed too closely to key decisions, meetings held where they didn't need to be held. Her lawyer skimmed the first page and stopped. She leaned forward. "What is this?" "Context," I said. Her eyes moved faster now. Too fast. "This doesn't prove anything," she said. "It doesn't have to," I replied. "It only has to slow you down." The lawyer set the folder down carefully. "These raise questions." "They raise timing," I corrected. "And timing is everything." She sat back, crossed her arms. "You're bluffing." "No, I said. I'm waiting. For what? For you to explain why Adrian created contingencies you didn't know about. Her mouth opened, then closed. The lawyer shifted in his chair. What contingencies? I looked at him. Ask your client why she pushed for authority before the reviews cleared. Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. She broke it with a laugh that sounded forced even to her own ears. You think this gives you leverage? I think it gives me patience, I said. Her lawyer spoke again, slower now. We should adjourn. I agree, she said quickly. This is going nowhere. We stood. Hands were not shaken. As we left, she leaned close enough that only I could hear her. You're making enemies, she whispered. I nodded. I know. That night, the first real crack appeared. An email forwarded quietly by someone Adrian trusted landed in my inbox. Internal. Careless. Written as if no one older or quieter would ever read it. She had assumed control would come quickly. She had assumed silence meant weakness. She had assumed the structures Adrian built were ornamental. They were not. The message wasn't damning by itself, but it confirmed something important. She had been planning her moves before the funeral ended. I forwarded it to my attorney with one line. Proceed. The response came an hour later. Understood. This changes posture. The next morning she called again. Her voice was different this time. Controlled but thinner. We should talk, she said. We already did. This is different. It usually is, I replied, when leverage shifts. She exhaled slowly. What do you want? The question wasn't about money, it never had been. I want what Adrian intended, I said, and I want this done cleanly. She laughed softly. Clean? Yes. She didn't argue. Instead, she tried something else. Appeal. You don't understand what it's like, she said, to lose him, to be left with everything unfinished. I let the words sit. I understand loss, I said. I also understand preparation. Another pause. Then she said the one thing she shouldn't have. You think he trusted you more than me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence did the work. 2 days later, the board postponed its vote. 3 days after that, her lawyer requested a revised strategy. By the end of the week, the tone had shifted entirely. No more threats. No more assumptions, just careful language and smaller steps. She believed she was regaining control. What she didn't realize was that the moment she asked what I wanted, the outcome had already been decided. Some people lose when they run out of options. Others lose when they finally realize they were never holding any, and she was very close now to understanding which one she was. The resolution didn't arrive with sirens or raised voices. It arrived with signatures. A revised agreement was delivered on a quiet morning, carried by a courier who didn't know what he was holding. I recognized the weight of it immediately. Not paper. Consequences. She didn't come with it. Her lawyer did. He sat across from me at the same dining table where she had once spread documents like trophies. His tone was careful now, respectful in a way it hadn't been before. This reflects a mutual understanding, he said. Your son's intent as documented. Control structures adjusted, authority redistributed. Redistributed, I repeated. Yes, he said. In accordance with governance provisions already in place. Adrian's provisions. The companies would be overseen by independent boards he had selected years earlier. The trusts would activate exactly as he designed them to. Distributions would occur slowly, conditionally, and never without transparency. And she would receive what the documents allowed. Comfort, not command. She called me that evening. No venom this time. No confidence either. I didn't know, she said quietly. I know, I replied. You think this makes you righteous, she said. No, I said. It makes me responsible. She laughed once, hollow. He planned for this, didn't he? Yes, I said, he did. Silence stretched between us. I loved him, she said finally. I believed she believed that. Love, I said, doesn't rush inheritance. She didn't argue. The following weeks were uneventful in the way real endings often are. The board settled. The audits closed. The questions stopped. She moved away. Not dramatically, no headlines, just distance. A quieter city, a smaller presence. I stayed where I was. In the house my son grew up in. The one filled with memory and intention. I returned to my routines. Morning walks. Reading without interruption. Evenings that belonged to no one else's agenda. Sometimes I thought about the funeral. about the way she had stood beside me so certain the world had tilted in her favor. Certainty is a dangerous thing. Adrian knew that. He built his life to withstand ambition, impatience, even betrayal. And in doing so, he gave me the final gift a son can give a parent. Clarity. Not revenge, not triumph, just the quiet assurance that nothing important had been taken. I visit his grave once a week. I don't speak much when I'm there. He never needed long explanations. He understood systems, people, outcomes. I tell him the companies are steady, that the people he trusted are still in place, that his work continues, and that I kept my promise. Some people believe money decides endings. They're wrong. Preparation does. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.